really taking a look at where our light tones are, our dark tones, the more lively it'll looks. You know, when I add that, all of a sudden it jumps out a bit more. So let's have a look. Hello everyone, my name is Danny. I'm an artist and urban sketcher from Berlin. Today we're focusing on architecture and buildings, and basically we have 3 goals. First one is learning to reduce architecture into basic shapes. The second thing we're going to do is focus on textures using ink and watercolor. And last but not least, we're going to be looking at using layers and viewing our subject matter in tonal values. So dividing it into light, mid, and dark tones. For something like a tower, I usually like to do what I call a helper line. That just really helps me, you know, get things centered and just get a feel for where on my paper do I want these objects to appear. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start, you know, just with some basic lines, basic shapes, trying to get a feel for what's gonna end up on my paper. And I usually like to start, especially when it comes to architecture, I always say, okay, what is the part of our drawing that absolutely needs to be present? In most cases, you know, it's the roof. So if we start somewhere down here and we don't have enough room, then our drawing's going to get a bit cut off in the end, and that's not what we want. So for instance, I might look here and say, okay, the distance of the bottom of our tower is about the same as, you know, the middle, so I can go down to roughly here. And then we can say, all right, you know, I'm not going to draw all the way to the edge of my paper. I'm just going to come down here and just define where my drawing stops. You can also imagine angles as the hands on a watch. So, you know, we have 12 o'clock, we have, you know, 3 p.m., 6 p.m. So you can also, you know, focus on angles and focus on basic shapes when you're doing your sketch, and that'll help, you know, sometimes to just focus on your eye rather than your mind, because your mind is always going to tell you, oh, well, this is a tower, we know how it works. And now I can go in with my fountain pen with waterproof ink, and I can go and, you know, do my exact line work. And here just also, you know, looking at angles. And the real important thing, especially when sketching our architecture, is to pay attention to these edges. So stuff like this, you know, this is going to be paramount to our sketch, and that's really going to make it pop out. So when we have these angles, you know, don't forget about them, because these are the defining elements which really give our sketch a bit of depth. So, and then, you know, especially with something like this, we get these sort of funky things, and you know, I just like to draw 2 little helper lines, and that, you know, just helps to save a bit of time, but then at the same time I have the top and bottom of these areas already defined. And I can also start hinting, you know, at the textures. So it's just a nice way to really give our sketch a bit of depth, and we don't have to draw every single shingle, you know, we're just hinting at things. You can also do the same with the stone work down here. Although this is much smoother, we have less texture, but nonetheless, I like to exaggerate my textures. I think that make our sketch seem a bit more interesting. That's our line work, and now we're ready to start, once we erase the pencil, with adding watercolors. So for this exercise, since I'm using one color and doing a monochromatic sketch, basically end up doing a black and white sort of watercolor sketch. But you can take any color you want. Maybe you want to use a sepia brown, maybe you want to do something in red tones or in blue tones. You know, it's really up to you. So to start off with, you know, I'm really going to work with a watery sort of wash and do what I think is the lightest part of the building, which of course is the base of the tower. And if I notice, oh, you know, it's a bit too dark, I can always go in and lighten it up. And especially here on this part, you know, I want to be quick because I want to have smooth edges. You know, I don't want a lot of contrast here. And I'll just, you know, quite generously apply that, and then at the same time with a damp brush go over and make sure that, you know, we don't have a super harsh edge. At the same time, I'm going to go to the left. Even though we have the light coming from this direction, I'm going to just add a little bit of the gray on this side. That's just gonna help make our building stand out. And we're gonna add some gray to this as well, but you know, as you can already see here, a tiny bit darker. With these first washes, I just wanna get a feel for the basic tonal values. You know, I want it to be clear. Just here, you know, going through and saying, okay, you know, I have an initial tone value. What do I want to do to sort of make it stand out? And I can also start adding a little bit of the shadows that we would have here, you know, and we're going to have that here too. And then basically, you know, going back up and saying, all right, you know, I have this part which is darker. So what are we going to do? You guessed it. We're going to go over this area with another wash. I can add it, you know, here, and then I can start, especially with, you know, the lightest side, I can use the second wash that we have, and I can start hinting at the textures. We have these two values which are quite light. Our eye is automatically telling us, oh, this is a bit darker, because we see that this is dark, and we see that we have edges here. I can do the same down with the roof here, using a sort of light to a mid-tone, thinking in tonal values. And then, you know, I'm going to keep going in, and each time I add a little more of this color, my consistency, you know, we're going to slowly be moving down this gradient from watery to normal, and then at the end, maybe a tiny bit that's a thick wash. You know, some layers, and then I'm also taking liberty to say, you know, I'm going to differentiate between these two sides. Now, you don't have to do that. That's one thing where, you know, I'm just going to say I'm going to take the artistic freedom, the artistic liberty to do so, just because I want this to look a bit more 3D. And now I'm starting, you know, to move into my darker areas. We can see how slowly we're getting more depth. That's what we really want. We want these sketches to have depth. I can also go back here to our, you know, in these corners, maybe adding a tiny bit more contrast so we get some depth. Now I'm slowly moving into my dark tonal values. And these are really going to be, you know, on the places where the sun isn't going to come through at all. You know, and I might hint at it. If it's a bit too dark, I can always go in and lighten it up. But we're especially going to pay attention to places, you know, like the roof and anywhere where we have part of our building which has a bit of, you know, these edges. We're really going to want to bring out the contrast there. And I can just go back in and say, okay, you know, where do I have really dark spots? Once again, you know, it's going to be around here where we have, you know, this shadow area, you know, anywhere where we have these edges really dark, just so that it stands out. You know, and these are just the final touches. You don't want to go overboard with them too. So what I can also do is I can sort of squint my eyes. That's a good trick to do. And say, okay, does everything seem to pop out? If it doesn't, and say, okay, where do I need a little bit of contrast? So, and I'm just gonna do a few final marks with the brush. That's just gonna, you know, give us some more texture. And there you have it. There's our monochromatic drawing. And we're going to do another sketch, an architectural sketch. This one has a bit more detail. And what we can do sometimes with architecture is say, okay, I'm just going to do a snippet. You know, I'm just going to focus on one little area. Here is what we're aiming for. So, you know, just doing part of the drawing. And as I said, you know, this is quite a complicated building. So if you're an experienced sketcher and really want a challenge, you know, you can go for this, or you might want to, if you decide to do something in color, choose a different photo. But overall, you know, looking again, doing basic shapes and then hinting at things. So as detailed as this might be, we look even closer, we have these crowns, we have all of this stuff. You know, at the end of the day, I'm just really going through and, you know, hinting at a lot of it. So, you know, creating an illusion in a sense so that the eye thinks, oh, you know, we have something very detailed. Just like with our monochromatic sketch and with our painting of the Indian yellow and some lemon yellow. And I'm just going to make a nice watery mix. Since we do have, you know, we have some green and we have some yellow. A few things are going to be white, but, you know, that's about it. So I'm going to go through and just, with one first wash, I'll go ahead and cover things up. And the important thing, especially when we're working with larger spaces is to make sure that we mix enough of our base color so that we don't have to go back in and remix, because otherwise it might be a bit difficult to get the same type of color. And once again, here at the lower part of my sketch, I've pretty much told myself I'm going to make a hard contrast, hard border, a harsh border, so that, I don't have to draw everything, and so I don't have to go to the edge of my paper. I'd like to go in and do the shadows on sort of this, and for that, I'm going to mix maybe a little purple gray. So I can go in here and apply that just very lightly first. So I'm going to continue with my yellow ochre now, but I'm going to go and I'm going to do basically our midtones. And if we look at our picture, we can see quite clearly, and even on location, if the sun is out, we really have some nice contrast. And that's really going to just make everything pop out a lot more. I'm just looking and seeing where do we have our shadows. It's always going to be here, where we have, things coming out. And already you can sort of see how it's starting to pop out of our page. And then I can go in and say, okay, I'm going to do a third wash for some certain parts. But here I'm going to be careful because I don't want it to get too dark. This is just going to be places where we have maybe some corners where we really have some shadows. And that can just be used for these edges just to let things pop out a tiny bit. And you can already see how just working in layers, we're able to create some depth. In this case, we don't have tons of textures, it's more about depth. But once again, we're just dividing things into tonal values, really taking a look at where our light tones are, our dark tones. I'll probably have a watery to normal type of wash. I'm just going to apply that to the dome here. And one tip I can always recommend when working with shadows, I like to mix ultramarine blue with English Venetian red, or even sepia sometimes. That just gives us a nice deep blue or even purple shadow. I always recommend you stay away from gray or black when you're doing shadows, because it just won't look as natural as if you use, maybe some blues or some reds or some browns to mix your shadows. All right, and if I want to, I can add maybe a few little blotches on the end. That's quite nice, just to fill our white space. But for the most part, we're finished. So here, just with the other areas, we're just using tonal values, really just focusing on using layers. Where do I have something that's quite light? Where do I have something that's a bit darker? And, just going through and working our way around the drawing. Watercolor drawing in color, otherwise you're more than welcome to do it in black and white. So I wish all of you guys lots of fun in sketching, and we will see each other